I'm glad you can. You know, we're going to have a lot of time tonight. It's very hard to follow John. He really is phenomenal. We'll have a lot of opportunity to talk about the Constitution and impeachment and why those of us support it or those of us who don't support it. But I want to begin by just saying there are really two moments in my work as a legislator that make me the most proud. And one of them is when I'm able to help people who really don't have a voice in the legislature. When I'm able to help a constituency that is really kind of left out. When I was able to help when we did the divestment from Sudan for the Sudanese community here in Portland, or when I'm able to help kids who are in jail get an advocate. You know, those quiet moments where you're helping somebody who doesn't have a voice. The other moments that I am most proud of are when you can be a vehicle for others. And last spring was one of those moments. During the wintertime, Gary Higginbottom came to my office and said to me, "We want you to submit a bill to call for our congresspeople to call on Congress to begin impeachment proceedings." And I said to Gary at that time, "I support what you're doing, but here's what I need in order to do that. I want you to go out and get 10,000 signatures. Let us know how strong this movement is. Because I got to tell you, if I just show up with a piece of paper and there isn't a troop of people behind me, it's going to be cast away in a heartbeat." And Gary came back to me 5 months later and he said, "Senator, here they are. Not 10,000, not 11,000, 12,000. Senator, will you now submit this bill?" And I said, "Proud." When you can be a vehicle for others in that way, it is the finest moment. But it wasn't just that I had that moment to be that vehicle for you. It was that I needed you after I submitted the bill. Because I gotta tell you, it was cold in that State House. Because when I stood up with those signatures out in front of the State House and says, "I'm gonna go submit this," I went and submitted it, and I did not get one legislator come up to me and say, "Thank you for doing that. I want to join you and be a co-sponsor." Not one. And that's kind of lonely. But then, I started getting emails from you, all over the state. 400 emails from people all over the state saying, "Thank you for doing this. Please take my email, pass it on to your colleagues, and let them know that we support what you are trying to do." And that's when I knew that being a vehicle is the best. Because then you know there's a movement. And that's the only way we change politics.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the very warm and gracious greeting. I appreciate it, truly. A lot of people suggested I was brave to do this, but the welcome was quite nice, and I appreciate that very much. First, we can all agree that war, in general, suggests a failure of great magnitude. It suggests a failure of our diplomatic, political, economic, and intelligence options. War should never be taken lightly. And those of us applying for this job must display an understanding and reverence for the Constitution, the balance of powers, and the authority it places in our hands. I believe the liberties afforded to us by the Constitution are, in fact, in the balance. However, not by the political forces here, where we are free to debate and dissent, but by those forces who fear our fundamental values. I think history, particularly the history of the Supreme Court, provides us the clearest arc from the past to the future. More so, the Supreme Court should provide us with continued confidence in the strength of the Constitution. As Woodrow Wilson said, the Supreme Court is kind of a constitutional convention in continual session. While the court may not always remedy wrongs in a satisfactory time frame, our Supreme Court has continually displayed the ability to correct an overzealous branch. Our country and our Constitution have both faced great conflict before. Those conflicts have at times raised many of the same constitutional questions we are preparing to discuss this evening. With each successive challenge, however, this country has returned to the constitutional center line, with the Supreme Court serving as the balancing point of the three branches of government. During times of conflict and crisis, Americans have always challenged the roles of the executive branch, the legislative branch, and even the judicial branch when they felt it was out of balance. This was true at our nation's birth, and it remains true to this day. It took several years before the judicial branch established the idea of judicial review. Abraham Lincoln declared martial law and suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War, pushing the envelope of the executive power at the expense of civil rights. Reconstruction was a judicial struggle between civil rights and states' rights. Franklin Delano Roosevelt challenged the very composition of the Supreme Court after the court found his New Deal legislation to be unconstitutional. Therefore, I cannot in good conscience support the idea of impeachment. It may scratch a political itch for some who have strong ideological differences with the administration, but impeachment is not an antidote for an unpopular president. I believe the crisis of our times is great and vital. Our very democracy is under attack, but I cannot join the chorus of ifs and buts, maybes and could-have-beens. Instead, I can only offer my thoughts on the struggle we are now engaged in, the constitutional questions we now face, and how I believe we should proceed. So I stand this evening as a voice of dissent. My right is protected by the Constitution. I have faith in our founders and all the great men and women who fought and died defending it, and our right to argue about it this evening.
Thank you very much again for having us here. And what I really appreciate about this discussion is framing this debate around the Constitution and looking at the broad implications of what has happened in this country in the last 8 years. And last month, I issued an agenda called A New Direction for Maine, A New Direction for the Country. And I talk about the fact that there's an unprecedented assault on civil liberties in this country over the last 8 years. And not only has the Bush and Cheney administration led the charge on that, but Congress, in fact, has failed us. And I think John's done a great job of outlining where Congress has failed to step up and to act and protect our civil liberties. And if I'm elected to Congress, I think what needs to happen is we need to repeal the Patriot Act. We need to restore habeas corpus. And we need to make sure that we close Guantanamo Bay immediately. No longer hold people illegally for years. But equally important, last week with the number of people here, I attended the rally in Monument Square that had to do, and I have to read this because I just haven't quite gotten syntax of it all right, but it's the Violent, Radical, and Homegrown Terrorist Prevention Act. That's before Congress got it. So we have an immediate chance, or we have an immediate obligation to step forward and talk on this bill, along with the Protect America Act, related to FISA, immunity, and all of those things. So I think it's important for us to address those things that have happened for the last 8 years. But we need to act today, tomorrow, and next week on those issues that are facing Congress now that are a threat to our civil liberties. Thank you very much.